If you're going to get anything from listening to this reflection, there are three things that I would like you to accept. Otherwise, I'm simply going to be wasting your time. The first is you're going to have to accept that when people have special experiences, say on a mountainside or burdened with sleep, perhaps some disclosure of some transcendental significance in their lives, some religious or other transcendent experience, this is not always simply a matter of fantasy or some sort of delusion, but it can be a disclosure of some objective truth. For it is that kind of experience that is related in the story of the Transfiguration. And the second thing I would ask you to accept is that reality can be seen from different perspectives, and a different kind of reality can be disclosed. If you consider, for example, what can be disclosed of the material world around us by training a telescope on the distant reaches of the universe, you will see something very different from looking at the movements of quanta of energy, of packets of energy, in something like the Hadron Collider. And those two different types of disclosure of reality are, in their turn, very different from the disclosure of reality you might get from looking at the face of a loved one in the middle distance, some 5 feet away from you. And the third thing is that such an experience may be very difficult or even impossible to describe, write down, relate to others in ordinary language. And I think this is something that we can see happening in the story of the Transfiguration, where on a mountainside, Jesus' closest followers experience him in a new form, transfigured. And the way this experience is described, is described in terms of an incident in the book of Exodus, where coming down from Mount Sinai, from having encountered God, Moses' face is shining and has to be veiled because the people that he's among cannot bear the glory of the sight. Moses has had an encounter with the glory of God reflected upon him, and it is this that is an important part, an important catalyst for the actual journey of the Exodus, which is going to continue towards the Promised Land. Now, when Jesus is encountered with in a shining form on the mountain of the Transfiguration and seen significantly talking with Moses and Elijah, this story is being described by Luke in terms which inevitably remind any reader or hearer of the story of the incident in Exodus. And the fact that Moses and Elijah and Jesus are seen by the disciples as talking about Jesus' coming departure. The word in Greek is exodos, so even the word looks back to the book of Exodus. But in the case of Jesus, the departure that he's about to engage in is his crucifixion. This is his coming death, which is prefigured in this extraordinary experience on the mountainside. And when Paul refers back to this incident obliquely, he talks of the transfiguration of Jesus being a much greater thing than the experience of Moses on Mount Sinai. In the transfiguration of Jesus, instead of Moses being veiled, the glory of God being veiled, in the case of Jesus, it is being revealed. Something true about Jesus is being revealed in this extraordinary experience where he is seen talking to Moses, the great Jewish lawgiver, and Elijah, the prophet of the end times, the last days. This is a glory which is greater than the glory experienced by Moses. But then something quite strange happens in Luke's Gospel, and this is the same in the other Gospel versions of this incident. It is immediately followed by a healing story where a man who has his only son, his only child, afflicted with terrible seizures. There's no point in speculating as to what exactly this affliction was. As ever, the New Testament describes it as an affliction by a demon or an evil spirit, but it is some sort of terrible affliction, whether it's epilepsy or something else is not the point. It is something that is destroying the lad's life, and not only does the emotional trauma of the father come through the telling of the story, but we can reflect on the fact that in that society, an only son, an only child afflicted in this way would have meant that the father would have been looking forward to no protection, to no support from the next generation of his family. So a terrible situation, a mess into which Jesus comes, and immediately he heals the lad and remonstrates with his followers for their lack of faith, their lack of ability to perform the healing themselves. He expresses anger and impatience with them because they have not been able to fully understand, to fully cope with the implications of what they've seen, understandably perhaps, but in a moment of impatience, he remonstrates with them and enacts the healing. Now, the curious thing here is that Jesus has just been unveiled in his glory. And here we see what this glory actually means. It's been experienced as something shining on a mountain, something glorious, something heavenly, something otherworldly. But it is immediately followed by a glory which is of a very different kind, a glory which is a healing of all that is broken, motivated by a burning compassion. It is really, I suppose, what God does when God's human face is seen in the world. There is something profoundly new being revealed about God. And not only that, but this is an incident that takes place on a journey towards Jerusalem, where an even more profound event is going to take place, and an even more profound engagement by God with the brokenness of human life. Because not only is the human face of God seen as a healer, as one who faces the forces of darkness and overcomes them by healing love, but one who goes into the darkness itself and lets it do its worst upon him. As Jesus goes towards Jerusalem, he is going to allow himself to be taken and killed by representatives, in their human way, of the forces of evil, of the forces that can break, that can destroy, that can kill, that can hurt, that can dominate. Let them do their worst, and in that act of unique and utter sacrifice, he will come to conquer the power of death itself. And so the glory of God that is revealed in the Transfiguration looks like a shining otherworldly glory, but in fact, when its effects are seen in this world, it is a glory of a very different kind. It is a glory that gets down into the mess, that fights with the evil, that brings healing love to bear, a healing love that will go to the point of death and beyond, and overcome it by so doing.